Oh boy, if there was ever a video essay that would get me in trouble with my viewers, it'd probably be this one. Susan Meyer is likely one of the most disliked characters, if not the most, in the entirety of Desperate Housewives, rivaled only probably by Tom Scavo. And there are some choice contenders for worst person in this series, I must say, and choosing Susan is definitely interesting. Many people find her entirely irritating, fake nice, overly needy, and utterly unaware of herself, and it's not uncommon for someone to completely skip her storylines altogether because they just can't stand her, which to me is a little excessive, mostly because I never actually hated her. I mean, there are people who just give her flack for, like, everything and find her annoying in any situation, even when she's justified. Like, I saw people get frustrated after she went off on Orson for literally running over her husband. Hello? You really can't understand her point of view there? Not to mention that she even works to try and forgive him by the end of that very episode. It's wild how people will just forget that.
Mike says I need to forgive Orson. And he's right. I have to find a way to make peace with all of this. But you need to understand, it's gonna be one of the hardest things I've ever done. And like most things in my life, I probably won't do it with much elegance or grace. If I don't smile when the two of you walk by, just please know that I still love you. And as for forgiving Orson, just be patient.
I think it's admirable that you want to forgive Orson. Because I can't.
There were times I disliked her, and many times where I sided against her, for sure. But I don't think I ever hated her explicitly. There's so much the writers would have to do to get me to hate any character in the first place, so there was almost no way with all the context that we get about Susan that I would end up in that place. I also don't think that she's an overtly bad person, mostly because I don't think those people exist. Thank you, BoJack Horseman. Annoying, yes, but bad person? Not really. I honestly think Susan is simply too easily swayed by her emotions, which makes her seem flighty and disloyal a lot of times, even when she is genuinely compassionate. Now, don't get me wrong, like most people in the fandom, she is my least favorite of the four main housewives. I just never particularly hated her or felt that she was a drag on the show overall. And here is why. I'm gonna start with the easiest plus to this character, and that's that Teri Hatcher is an incredibly natural actress. It's actually wild how well she does in this role, and I doubt Susan Meyer would have been half as endearing to me if she had not played it. She is able to turn any scene into a heartbreaking moment and effortlessly convey Susan's wildly different feelings, because she kind of goes all over the place. I think part of the reason why she's so annoying for other people is how often she cries, but I was impressed with how easily Teri Hatcher was able to embody this character so completely. For people that knew someone like Susan, she hit a little bit too close to home. And whatever your feelings on the character, we can all agree that the writing is messy, not necessarily Teri Hatcher's performance. I mean, her acting during Mike's funeral is absolutely devastating. She is able to convey the complete despair so well, and I commend her greatly for keeping a consistent performance, even though the writing for her character was spotty at times. That I won't deny. I'm not saying this is a great character. She's severely flawed, and I think there are several missteps with her development and story, namely Ian and the divorce, which I'll discuss more later. But overall, I still enjoyed her presence, found her funny, and never really hated her. There were even aspects I could relate to. Teri is also a fantastic comedic actress, it must be said. The amount of physical humor she's able to do across the 8 seasons is pretty impressive, and although Susan's situations are ludicrous and sometimes frustrating, they can be absolutely downright hilarious to watch unfold, and a lot of that is due to Teri Hatcher's delivery and commitment to her bits. Her little frustrated, embarrassed squeak is honestly iconic to me. I've recently seen people say they even hate that, but hey, I guess it's just a preference. I found it pretty funny and kind of adorable. Just like I have Susan to this situation beyond belief, and there is nothing left I can do because I'll just make it worse, so I'm just gonna internally scream, and a little squeal escapes because I'm bad at concealing my emotions. Another reason I like Susan Meyer is her genuine kindness. Yes, there are definite times throughout the series where Susan makes selfish decisions, and through those, her kooky personality and cutesy way of acting seem to be more of a front for her malicious interior. And while I agree that Susan can definitely be self-involved, especially when it comes to anything with Edie, although they did end their story well, I'll address this again later on, I don't think any decision she makes in this series comes from any sort of vindictive or evil place. Like in season 2, when she lies to Mike about Zach Young's location and sends Zach far away. When I asked on the subreddit what people disliked about Susan, this was one of the most cited instances. It's a terrible move on her part, and one that hurts Mike a great deal. Also stalling a reunion between a father and a son that, you know, she deserved to have zero control over. She is trying to protect Julie here, is how the show contextualizes it. In fact, we see that when she finds Zach and buys him food, she tries to get him to come with them. But when he begins talking about Julie after how obsessive and scary he became last season, she gets frightened once again. Not excusing this, but you have to remember that this kid held her hostage at gunpoint for hours, stalked her daughter, and genuinely made her fear for her life. Even though she knows exactly what the right move is here, I can see why she would make this choice, wrong as it may be. She's afraid for her daughter, and even the other women of Wisteria Lane understand that. I think obviously the worst part about this decision is lying to Mike and pretending that she was okay with Zach being in their lives as his child when she clearly wasn't ready for it. The thing about Susan is, she's messy. Not evil, but messy. Her mind is clouded by her feelings so easily, she felt she could get over Zach as a prospect, but facing the reality of that situation, the fear directly in your face, changes your opinion a great deal. Again, not an excuse, I'm merely stating I understand her motivation, and I don't think she's particularly malicious. She tried to get him to come home because she truly did want them to be in their lives for Mike, but once she was faced with the reality, she just couldn't handle it. And although that does make her a bit of a coward, I definitely do understand her, and I don't hate her for making that choice. I don't think the writers really excuse this behavior either, because Susan doesn't even really give herself a pass for this one. Mike is obviously pissed off and leaves her, and there's the infamous moment where she cries for him to stay even after her betrayal. But the next episode, Susan is actually incredibly introspective and states that she can't be angry with Mike and that she is the only one at fault. She doesn't expect him to calm down, which I do really appreciate. It's not until she's able to accept the possibility of Mike not being in her life and resolving to just be friends with him for them to reconcile and her to prove that she's not selfishly trying to do everything she can to earn his love back. I truly do think she took Zach and Mike bowling out of kindness, although many will interpret this as her trying to win Mike back, which I can't invalidate. I mean, that's your opinion, and that is totally fine, but personally, I believe Susan was trying to do the right thing to balance the scale for her major mistake, regardless of whether or not Mike would come back to her. And she admits that she was wrong in the first place, and is able to work past her fear of Zach Young. Plus, if Mike forgives her eventually, why can't we? I know there's a perception about, oh, how the writers wanted her to win and made her seem cute, and she's the main character, so even if she did something bad, she didn't grow and never realized it. But I kind of prefer to simply analyze the reality of what we received with the show, and I truly think they did spend time showing Mike gradually getting over his anger, and Susan gradually getting over Mike to reward their reconciliation later in the season. Now, she does get back together with Carl in season 2, which, you know, that is a messy bitch decision if there ever was one. But, again, it just doesn't make me hate her. Let's not forget her and Ian in season 3. Tons of people also on the subreddit feel that she left Mike way too quickly and that she's generally just a flighty person. Oh, the love of my life is in a coma, let me jump into the arms of someone else. Well, I don't blame anyone for seeing it this way. It's not that simple, and that's kind of the whole point of the storyline. With all of the housewives even, most of the storylines point out that life is just not that simple, even if we present it that way on the surface, as housewives tend to do. The doctors were explicitly telling her that Mike would likely never wake up, and that she should resolve to move on with her life. Then Ian pursues her quite vehemently and makes a genuine case for why they should chase happiness when they find it, even if it might feel wrong. Listen, I didn't even really like this storyline, nor did I feel too much chemistry between them as a couple, but I do understand the concept that they were going for here. Susan and Ian were both entrenched in misery, day in, day out, completely isolated and lonely in their grief. I think many people who criticize them for cheating on their significant others fail to recognize the catastrophic lows of these emotions. Not that I don't agree that this is just a poor romance plotline, because it is. Writing-wise, I just don't like it, and it detracts from the idea that Susan and Mike are, you know, true love. It felt lazy, honestly, so I understand why people dislike Susan's character greatly during this arc. I'm just saying that I understand where they were going with this plotline and following the thread of her development as a drama junkie, as described by the woman with quads of steel at the end of season 3. I don't think they would have had a character read Susan for filth like this if they thought she had been smooth sailing through season 3 with her decisions. She 100% wasn't, and I don't think the writers deny that, especially when you consider that lady was incredibly correct. I think her admitting that she has been a drama junkie for this long and has been seeking out complication and perhaps making her life more difficult than it needs to be is part of the reason why her and Mike getting back together is rewarded here. And then, you know, season 5 happens. But, you know, that's kind of a different thing. Another just misstep in the romance plotline, but I'll talk about season 5 in its own context later because I actually think it led to some great development with Susan herself. So there's lots of discussion too. One of the most cited moments around the arc in season 6 where she believes that Danny Bolin has strangled Julie, even though the police have let him go and there's no evidence to prove that he is. Susan is slowly losing her grip during this episode and nearly harms a young man out of fear for her daughter. She's an adult, so she should be able to control herself, yes. But I didn't despise her after this. She recognizes later that she's been completely irrational and does what she can to make it up to Angie by helping her clean up and providing comfort when they're at their most alienated. For people who say that she doesn't recognize her mistakes, she absolutely will admit when she is wrong and make steps to avoid it. What I love most about this scene, there's no apology. There's no Susan cries and breaks down and says I'm sorry and acts cute, as people always say she does. She simply comes over, says nothing, and helps out, because that's all she can do. And I appreciated the fuck out of the ending of that storyline, even if yeah, Susan went way too far. I mean, dropping a car, that is wild. But you know, Desperate Housewives kind of just lives in a separate realm of reality. It doesn't mean that Angie has to forgive her either, but it does show Susan's intentions. She was scared and acting erratic, and now wants to make up for it. None of that is evil to me, but showing up and proving you want to do better is at least a step in the right direction, and something that people say Susan never does. Another one of the things people criticize her for most is when Julie comes back pregnant in season 8 and has decided to give up her baby. Susan really struggles to accept this decision and kind of hounds Julie, even chasing away potential adoptive parents in an effort to get Julie to keep the baby. Obviously, wrong. I mean, she leads these people to believe that Julie was in prison and, you know, hurting herself on a daily basis. I mean, there's no defending that. And while this scene is, I won't lie, pretty hilarious, I was not a fan of her during it, nor when she suddenly encouraged Porter to pursue custody as a father, although I will say that he decided to keep that on his own without Susan's input, and he does have a right to do that and know about the baby, so I don't think Susan was entirely in the wrong. I think Mike contextualizes her behavior really well this season as coming from a place of love. Feeling love so strongly, that is why she acts so selfishly sometimes. She feels her personal connection so firmly that she blinds herself to the plight of others around her. And it's not an excuse, but it is at least an explanation, and one that shows that it doesn't come from an evil heart. In this situation, she's stating that she feels Julie isn't understanding how hard it will be to give up the baby, and just how much she might want to keep it, because she's experienced motherhood in a way that Julie just hasn't. And while that is annoying, especially when you're a younger person watching this show, and you say perhaps to your parents that you don't want children, and they say, just give it time. Get that frustration? I totally understand it, girl. But for what it's worth, after Julie asserts that she has thought about it a ton, Susan does actually calm down. I liked the scene where Julie accuses her of taking the choice away from her by pushing those adoptive parents away. A lot of this series is the main characters making really harsh mistakes, but still being able to move forward. I mean, one of the most moving things about Bree's storyline, everyone's favorite, is her relationship with Andrew. She straight up abandoned him on the side of a road, but they are able to reconcile later on. I believe that Susan is able to make up for these mistakes as well, and later in the storyline, she's resolved for Julie to do what she needs to do with her own life. But Julie herself decides that she wants to keep the baby after they discover the letter about Mike's sister from his mom. It's a very sweet scene, and one that I think is underplayed in the fandom. Julie made this decision on her own. Susan even tries to encourage her in this scene that she isn't doing the same thing as Mike's mother as what she's going to do with her own baby. I appreciated that so much from her, and I felt it was a good example of her learning to be more sensitive to how Julie is feeling and what she actually wants and has chosen. But Julie is the one who makes that choice in this scene, realizes what she actually wants out of life, and decides to keep the baby. And while yes, I do think the writing of this show is definitely overly motherhood is a gift focused perhaps, and it shouldn't be a choice because it's perfect, it goes a little bit too far in that direction, I do appreciate some of the sentiments that come from these messages. Plus, besides all these mistakes that people quote a lot, there are so many examples of her showing extreme compassion for those she's close to, and even people she's like almost strangers with. One that I feel are largely ignored when speaking about her character. I feel that although she does go up and down, Susan does get way more bearable for me as the seasons go on, definitely beginning with season 4. She draws a clear, appropriate line with Mike and shows some great growth when she threatens to leave if he doesn't face his drug addiction and go to rehab.
I've just got to get through this.
No. There's no tomorrow. It's now. You will quit this now. You will go to rehab, or so help me, I will leave you. I will take this baby and I will leave you.
I felt that that was a fantastic moment for her character, which showed how much she prioritized her child's health and happiness over her selfish personal love life or romantic emotions. A very powerful scene, and something that I'm not sure Susan would have been able to do as she was gunning for Mike in the earlier season. I feel her relationship with Bob and Lee is also a great indicator for how Susan acts in general, trying to be overly nice to the point where you ruin everything between yourselves and them, initially making the worst first impression possible. But over time, when Susan calms down, doesn't act so erratically, or work so hard to impress them, they're able to become good friends, which we do see in season 5. Overcompensating is Susan Meyer's middle fucking name. And while, yes, as a gay man, I would have been just as catty as Lee was when I first met her, I do think I would have come to love Susan in time for the messy straight friend she is. As well, in the next season, after divorcing Mike, although not a great storyline, in my opinion, if they intended them to be together in the end, I did enjoy a lot of the development that they went through with Susan, taking back her painting as a gesture to Catherine's new relationship with Mike and supporting them, her mistakes with the pearls and subsequent resolution to go back to work on top of her children's book business to provide her child with the education she feels is best. Now yes, this also contains one of her greatest mistakes, where she accuses and tries to steal Catherine's pearls because she wants to send her son to school instead of just getting a job herself. Obviously, huge mistake and largely self-involved. Why don't you make more money, Susan? But what people fail to recognize is that Susan does admit these problems. At the end of the episode, she straight up says, "My husband is doing everything he can." And Mike, and the writers by extension, don't let her off easy again either. He directly says, like, how dare you? How dare you think this? Like, what is wrong with you? It's not as if she never gets to recognize her problems or face the mistakes she's made, as people imply sometimes. I felt that her self-reliance and ability to accept Mike moving on with a friend of hers was very admirable in this season, and I'll talk more about her relationship with Jackson later on. And even though there is a definite misstep with her crying behind the door after he appears to take her back, she does still, after that, resolve to move forward with her life as a single woman, and even while she agrees to the green card marriage with Jackson, she doesn't form a romantic relationship with him at all, even while he is living in her house, which I think takes a lot of courage and resolve on Susan's part. In season 6, letting Robin stay with her was one of the most generous things she ever did, and was so genuinely sweet. She was very understanding and not judgmental at all of her situation, encouraging her and doing everything she could to get her life on the track that Robin wanted. It was so beautiful to watch this woman use her privilege to lift another woman up and help her improve her life, which did indeed happen in the show. Additionally, after everything that happens with Catherine, she actively tries to include her in their friendship, even after Catherine acted so wild in season 6 towards Susan and Mike specifically, and, you know, tried to frame her husband for murder. She tries to reach out to her while she's working through her mental health issues. Susan is just always going out of her way to be kind to people. She's not always good at it, but she is trying, and that's something I always appreciated about her character. Whenever someone is emotionally hurting, she always moves to comfort them. Like with Renee when she catches her crying alone. She is genuinely compassionate and does go out of her way to comfort others. Yeah, she shouldn't have just walked into Renee's house. What are you doing, Susan? She's just clumsy and messy. But she does genuinely care. There is a perception that she's a fake person because she isn't the most loyal, which I will fully admit about her character. Loyalty is an important trait for a lot of people to see in their characters in fictional media, and I think especially in a show that's built around female friendships, it's reasonable to value it highly. But lacking loyalty does not automatically make someone a bad person. She's made some poor choices, yes, but there is abundant evidence that she cares about those around her and is genuinely kind and generous. She may not always make decisions in favor of her friends, but usually it's because they were put at odds with her family. She always has a reason. It's never malicious, as people say it is, when she wants to be friends with everyone and simultaneously screws them behind their back. And I would say the arc in season 7 with Paul Young is one of the most insightful and beautiful acts of forgiveness and redemption in the whole series, quite honestly. I always get giddy when I get to the scene where Susan encourages him that he could be the neighbor that they all missed and used to be friends with, the one they like. She's the only one who makes this commitment to him and checks on him when his mental health is going down the drain, and Felicia Tillman is actively killing him. She is the reason that Paul Young survived and confessed to his crimes, righting the wrongs that were started in the very beginning of the show, which she gets no credit for. She earned a lot of points in my mind for this act and her consistency. She didn't just try once to help Paul Young. She was annoying and persistent, as Susan can often be, and it wasn't for any romantic pursuit or selfish interest. She truly wanted to help rehabilitate Paul, even though she's still sure he murdered Martha Huber. After all, she was the one in season 1 who was the most suspicious of him. Her ability to see the good in people, despite all they've done, is nothing short of miraculous, and I think she deserves a lot more credit for rehabilitating Paul Young pretty much entirely by herself, and while everyone else was telling her not to. Overall, yes, she has made a lot of mistakes, as do all of the main characters in this series. I think it's ridiculous to single out Susan and her mistakes when everyone does some pretty egregious thing over the course of the 8 seasons. I truly think she does learn, and that she does a ton of good too. It's important to recognize both. As the series says, goodness and evil can live side by side in one heart, although I don't ever think Susan's evil anyway. She is not an amazing person, but she's not an awful person either. She's a person. She does good things and bad things. And yeah, if she annoys you, you're completely valid to just not like her. As people in real life, you just don't have to like them, just avoid them, which is totally fair. But I don't think she deserves to be so vehemently hated, and I'm saying I personally don't think she's all that bad. Next up, a lot of people hate Susan, likely because of the Edie situation. There's a running gag throughout the series about Susan and Edie being adversaries, and a lot of people side generally with Edie in nearly every situation. And while I do agree in some cases, I do think Edie also makes some pretty nasty moves throughout their relationship, and their adversarial nature definitely goes really far in both directions, to the point where I would just call it even. The quarrel over Carl definitely has many turning against Susan for sleeping with him immediately after he presumably broke up with Edie, and then it turns out he didn't break up with Edie. It's obviously not a smart decision, but she was under the assumption he was single, so Carl manipulated her. But later, Edie burns down Susan's house in retaliation for lying, and also burning down her own house by accident in the first season. So, you know, little from column A, little from column B. Not to mention that when Carl is aggressively pursuing Susan later in the season while still with Edie, Susan is the one who continuously rejects him and encourages him to just stay and marry Edie and commit to her. She is not on board with that at all. My point is that neither of them are really just in their crusade against the other. That's kind of the entire point in their fight. Whether it be for Carl or for Mike, it's wild to find fault with Susan when so much occurs because of ridiculous happenstance, like the car accident with Edie on roller skates, or the house burning down, or the bee's nest. It's absolutely absurd and not at all realistic. So blaming Susan has always seemed a little bit odd to me. So much of this show is things spinning out of control, even though she definitely makes many mistakes. Shouldn't have been in Edie's house in the first place, obviously. Does she deserve fault for Edie's house entirely burning down? I don't think so. Edie convinces Mike that he actually hated Susan after he was in a coma and manipulated his memories. So you know what? They're good. I think they've both done enough. And later in season 3, they seem to hit a bit of a good point, almost doing exactly as I said and calling it even. Edie's comment on their friendship, even in a comedic context, is touching because they do bounce off one another well. That's part of why their scenes were always fun to watch. And Susan even says that she doesn't blame Edie for hooking up with Carl. She blames Carl for going back back and forth between the two of them, which is, yes, put some responsibility on that philanderer for once. But in season 5, they actually do a really great job of bringing these characters back together and partially repairing their relationship. I love the episode where they get trapped in the basement together. Edie is really able to highlight a stark pattern in Susan's behavior with men.
Here it is, the history of your love life. Proof that you can't be happy without a man.
This is not proof of anything.
7 boyfriends through high school and college, only 41 days single. And it doesn't get much better into the many decades of your adulthood.
Hey, I was single for several months after Carl and after Mike.
But that wasn't of your choosing. They dumped you. I know. It's hard to look in the mirror. But the difference is, I go after men because I want them. You go after them because you need them.
That is not much of a distinction.
Yes, it is. You have holes in your heart that can only be filled by a pair of trousers. Face it, Meyer. You're weak.
And gets her to move forward without Jackson, which is a crucially important piece of her development moving forward. And yes, like I said before, she does backslide when Jackson comes back into her life. I understand that crying at the door moment is embarrassing, but it is realistic. She's trying to be okay with being alone and trying to be better, but she's struggling. Everyone struggles to be better. It's not a linear progression. Her admitting that and then continuing the effort is an even greater moment for me. Honestly, she recognized that, yeah, I failed. I failed in this effort that I committed myself to a while back. And I have to keep trying. I have to try harder because clearly I'm not doing enough. Even if this wasn't one of my favorite storylines with her divorce and subsequent reunion with Mike, I do think it led to some nice character work overall that did indeed stick. Susan is much more independent in the next season, and sometimes to a fault, like with Danny Bolin, and sometimes in super brave ways, like with Va 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 Broom, which I honestly loved as a storyline. Susan taking their money problems that Mike created, by the way, into her own hands and doing something that many would perceive as unsavory, even though, you know, they really should. It wasn't even porn. She was just cleaning in lingerie. It's like not even that racy when you look at the internet today. It's like way more insane. But fuck that storyline and Mike and Lynette for shaming her. She earned that Va 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 Broom sponsorship. Another point is about Susan leaning on Julie. I'm not going to make excuses for this behavior because honestly, I was also very shocked at how Julie was treated by her mother in these earlier seasons. It's clear that she's very codependent, and we casually learn a lot about how much Julie had to do around the house, and it's quite alarming. Everyone is totally correct in pointing this out as a toxic behavior on her part. However, they don't really point out that the show does admit that this is a flaw many times, as much as I think that they shouldn't have made many jokes about it. When Julie accuses her of being a bad mother for forcing her to take care of everything, and it not necessarily stopping a year after her divorce, Susan is taken aback, but she does admit that she's right to Mike. I really appreciated that scene, and it contributes against that perception where Susan never recognizes or admits her flaws and acts cutesy, pretending she's perfect all the time, when in reality, she just told one of her major flaws to the man she is pursuing. That's a great deal of honesty. She definitely does admit them. I will say, the writing does her dirty in several episodes by making her relearn things that she's already covered, but real life progress isn't linear either. Sometimes it takes a couple lessons to really take hold for some people, especially when they're extremely lacking in some areas, like loyalty, like Susan is. And it's not like she's a terrible mother either because of this. The show also goes out of its way to show multiple times that Susan is willing to lay down her own life to protect Julie. The important thing is that it does eventually take hold. By season 4, she's much more lax with Julie and allows her to live the life of a normal teenager without expecting her to support her emotionally. Granted, she does have Mike around, but when he goes to rehab, this behavior does not return. Sure, she enjoys having Bree take care of her. Who wouldn't? But she doesn't lean on Julie again, and that says something. This behavior is also pretty evident in season 3. As well. Although overly concerned with Julie's dating life, she is generally much more lenient with Julie and doesn't have her do too many things around the house, or at least it appears to me. I think people criticize her a lot for generally acting emotionally immature and needing others to comfort her all the time, which I do understand, but in other areas, she can be extremely strong. I respect her so much for sending Mike to rehab and caring more for his well-being than their marriage in the first place that I feel her needing support while he's away is pretty reasonable. She is pregnant and also raising a teenager teenage girl. You can't deny that that's a lot to handle. At the very least, I can understand it. There is the one episode where she's reluctant to allow Julie to go to college early, but again, she learns to let Julie go and not lean on her so much. Even Julie admits that she can see how much Susan has changed. And so, in the subsequent seasons, Julie isn't pressured to stay at home and take care of Susan, no matter how hard things get. She doesn't even want to take her kidney, not even when she's divorced. This is what I mean when Susan can be extremely strong when she needs to be. And in the end of season 8, she's willing to change her whole life to be there for Julie and help her raise her child while she attends school. That is a huge gesture that I feel often doesn't get credit because of Julie and Susan's fighting earlier about this child, which I already spoke about. She resolves to be more involved and helpful to Julie than she's ever been in the past, and is working to change and be a more supportive mother and not lean on her child nearly as much for comfort. And in this case, she doesn't have Mike to lean on either. As an end to her arc, I thought this was incredibly touching and strong for her. She's able to effectively grieve and is not nearly a mess after Mike's death. Plus, she doesn't emotionally rely on those around her too hard. You're allowed to request support from other people. Sure, the housewives resolve to help her pick up the pieces with MJ and give her advice in areas that she may be lacking, but her moving away from them proves her confidence in her own ability to raise her children and grandchild nearly on her own, and that she doesn't need to lean on other people to be able to process her grief. Another whole point for me about why I like Susan and her arc in general is that she doesn't get almost anything she wants in the end. That's perhaps the biggest part of why Susan didn't leave a bad taste in my mouth. The ending to her arc was actually incredibly touching for me. I know that a lot of people hate that they killed Mike and felt that it was random, but I found that after Susan's tortured love life, her resolving to be happy with what she has and to not chase love so heavily anymore was really, really touching. Plus, for those who felt she never suffered consequences for her actions, she must have realized after all this drama that some time with the man she loved was missed because of all the mistakes she made and her overly indecisive and flighty nature. And I truly do think she learned from these mistakes and resolves to be different for the future and appreciate more what she has. It's not nothing, and it's a large reason why I ended up liking Susan by the end of the series, while she still was not my favorite. The Susan at the end is quite a layered person. She's been through a lot, been tested, broken off a lot of friendships, and lost nearly everything she's wanted over the course of the series. But is she a mess like she started? Not at all. In fact, she states that she's content with her memories and seems to be processing Mike's death in an extremely healthy and measured way. She doesn't deny that she could find love in the future, but she's not gonna look too heavily for it because she realizes she has everything she needs to be happy and appreciates it. She isn't denying her grief or blocking her emotions, and she isn't forcing them onto others either. She's able to face them herself and take care of herself simultaneously. I really appreciated the person Susan became by the end of the series, and I think even though there were definitely harsh missteps in continuity, she did confront her flaws and ultimately grow. So once again, this is not a Susan is actually a fantastic person video. This is a I don't think Susan is as bad as everyone says video. Yes, she lacks loyalty and consistency, and her story kinda goes all over the place, and I enjoyed the other housewives stories more. I won't defend those things. Like I said, we're not toxic positivity here, just ignoring people's faults. But there are definitely many good aspects of Susan's character that I did enjoy, and that at least elevated her out of this F-tier character territory from my perspective. But like I've said repeatedly, if you dislike her, I can fully see why, and I do not blame you. I just think if she were real, I'd probably be friends with Susan, like Lee is. Sometimes you just gotta appreciate the good-intentioned mess. Maybe I'm just a gay man used to straight shenanigans. But anyway, if you enjoyed, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/PosiTVty to get extra content in the form of unedited essays, so you get to hear all of my lovely mistakes and perhaps things I didn't want the wider audience to hear. And you get all of these videos before they come out on YouTube, but the support here means a lot, so thank you for liking, commenting, watching, subscribing, doing all that wonderful stuff. Please discuss further. We love talking about TV, obviously, and we'll see you for the next one. Feel free to request whatever you want. Bye!